Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macker, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School podcast. And before I get to anything, let me first just say, if you don't have sources on the Donovan Mitchell trade, you're not a real Knicks fan, because I'm sorry. Just that's the qualification nowadays. Jeremy Cohen, my better podcasting half. If you don't have something to report, man, I don't think we could do this episode.
I got something to report. It has nothing to do with the Donovan Mitchell trade, though. I mean, I could report a lot of different things, honestly. But for Donovan Mitchell,
I can report it's a sunny day in Long Island right now.
Yeah, it's a sunny day in New York, the real New York. It's nice here. Oh yeah, that's right. I said it. Yeah, that's right. But things are good. It's hot. It's too hot, honestly. Way too hot. I'm gonna flex for a moment. I got to go to the Elton John concert last night.
Very nice. That's a good thing to report.
It was also it was in the 7th row, so that's the ultimate flex. Never had that happen before. Didn't have to pay out the wazoo to get it, and it was an incredible experience. But it's so hot, and I feel like the heat is kind of contributing to a situation with Donovan Mitchell where it just gets crazy. You know, it's like do the right thing, just with Donovan Mitchell instead. That's how it feels. Oh,
Andrew shaking his head.
Whatever. No, I'm saying, it leads to tension and chaos. And
you know what I think? I think Leon Rose and Danny Ainge should get a nice slice of Sal's pizza and, and enjoy it. Maybe a cool Coca-Cola and hammer this thing out. That's what I think. As it were,
because that's what they did in the end of Do the Right Thing.
They hashed it out.
They hashed it out and came to a mutual agreement, and everything's fine now.
Yep.
He paid Mookie his money. He did pay Mookie his money.
And then some.
And that's it. If you haven't seen Do the Right Thing, stop listening to this podcast and go watch Do the Right Thing. It's the most important movie of the last 40 years. Anyway, hi, Jeremy. We, of course, are sitting here doing a Knicks podcast in which we legitimately do not have any new Knicks news to report, because as much as there have been many people out of Utah, out of Phoenix, under a hole in the wall, that have claimed that they know that the Donovan Mitchell trade is happening, what it contains, this and that. There's still no news. Alas, we must trudge forward. So we are going to do some more Donovan Mitchell content today, but we are going to try to, I believe, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy very quickly, crystallize, clarify, if you will, some of the stuff that has been flying around in the air, because we did a cap or no cap with Donovan Mitchell once upon a time, but man, those are like the olden days. Now we're back to the future, right?
We're changed men. The circumstances are, so different. Everything about it's different. So yeah,
I don't even recognize it. Yeah. So yeah. You ready? Are we doing this?
I thought we were gonna have a little bit more foreplay, but I'm happy to jump right into it. That's fine.
No, so when the shorts are off. I gotta move my car, and the meter's running out. That's actually I shouldn't tell that story on the air. That's gonna be for Patreon content.
I like how what I said, Andrew's just like, what the hell? And then you started talking. He's like, what the hell? Just the facial expressions.
Yeah,
that was the implication.
We are off and running today.
It's fine. It just goes to show.
I blame the Heat.
You always blame Pat Riley.
I blame the Miami Heat for everything. Yes, a lot of my misery in life.
Sorry, but that actually is a great segue, because it feels like there was a lot of foreplay initially when this rumor broke, and I think there were a lot of reactions by people who have any interest in this trade happening or not happening or whatever. And now things have kind of, obviously, it seems like, settled down, which to me has just shed light on the fact that this is a true negotiation. I could be wrong. God knows I don't know what these sides are talking about, but it has now been, we're going on 2 weeks. And I think if you believe some of the reporting, I mean, these teams have been talking as far back as the draft. So this is, I think this is what this is supposed to look like, with a lot of back and forth and different ideas being exchanged. and now we're here, and it'll get done, I think it'll get done. I think you think it'll get done. It's just a matter of seeing what the pieces are.
It's true. And, so the thing I wanted to really focus on this week was, it seems like it was ages ago. And yet one of the conversations as well was the intricacies of Donovan Mitchell, but also Russell Westbrook, trades with the pick situation, all that. So there's a lot to cover. And I thought the best way to do that would be by kind of helping folks visualize it maybe a little bit more if they're having trouble kind of seeing it. So I created, this. It is a new slideshow. It's a Spida and Russ again. I can't take this anymore. And as you can see from the first slide, if you're watching, I put very little effort into it because I can't take it anymore, John.
This is worth subscribing to the YouTube, by the way, if anybody's listening. So. Yeah, this is absolutely worth it. Don't describe this slide. Just going to go on the YouTube.
Agreed. So the next slide, the rest of the presentation is a little bit more pizzazz to it than this one, but I will continue. I wanted to first focus on the Jazz and their future draft picks. And this is from Real GM. And basically, you don't have to pay attention to the second round picks. That's kind of moot to the conversation because Danny Ainge doesn't care about obtaining second round picks. He cares about obtaining first round picks.
And blood.
First round picks. Pound of flesh. So in 2023, the Jazz have their own first round pick. They have the least favorable of the Nets, Rockets, and Sixers first round pick. And they have the Timberwolves first round pick. In 2024, they have their own pick 1 through 10 protected. If it's 11 to 30, it goes to OKC. John, I don't know about you. I think this pick is probably going to stay with the Jazz. I don't think it's going to go to OKC. Just a thought.
If I was a betting man right now, I would bet that the Jazz are going to finagle their way into one of the, a top 10 pick in 2 years.
Right. And then the same thing happens in 2025. In addition to owning the rights to the Timberwolves first.
Unprotected.
And then unprotected, yes. And then 2026, it's 1 to 8 their own, or they can swap with the Timberwolves. And if it's 9 to 30, it goes to OKC if that pick we've talked about hasn't conveyed. So basically, if you're the Jazz, you want to be extremely bad the next 3 seasons. And that final season, you want either the Wolves to be terrible or you to be bad enough where you basically have collected 4 top 8 picks. And that's a pretty good spot to be in if you are a small market team that is rebuilding. So they could very easily be a basement dweller for the next 4 years and then try to rise, because in 2027, they have their own first unprotected. The protections on the OKC pick are eliminated completely. And they own the Timberwolves 2027 pick, unprotected. 2028, it's their own first. 2029, it's their own first and a protected Timberwolves first. It's protected 1 through 5.
I think 3 years is right. Maybe they stink for 4 years, but you're talking, it sure seems as if they are cleaning house this year. That gives them a year to get into the top of the draft, at which point they will presumably select the next great Jazz player. Well, sometimes it works out like that. Sometimes it doesn't work out like that, and you may not get that player, and then you go back into the tank. And then, it feels like if it could go a surprising direction. I think maybe Danny Ainge, when he hired Brad Stevens, didn't expect it to go as well as it did, as fast as it did. That was a very fortuitous situation in Utah. I'm not so sure it's going to be so, but we'll see. But yeah, it feels like 3, maybe 4 years is the stink timeline for Utah.
Agreed. And Will Hardy has a 5-year contract, so he's got time on his side. No, it is not. But the reason I wanted to point out the draft picks is because it highlights a glaring difference between years. Every other year, the Jazz have double picks, or in that case, more than 1 pick in a draft. But then you look at 2024, 2026, and 2028, they don't have first round picks those years. And so if you're Danny Ainge, what you probably want to do is have at least 2 picks in every single draft for the next 7 years. And there are 3 years that are missing, which brings us to the Knicks and their picks and the fact that they want Donovan Mitchell, and the Jazz want to trade Donovan Mitchell, and they want to acquire more picks, and they want to be set. And so it seems that this dance the square dance, whatever you want to call it, is I'd like to imagine Danny Ainge and Leon Rose square dancing. I think it'd be kind of
all that went through my head was my favorite low-key Eminem song is called Square Dance. If anybody else on this podcast has ever heard that song, kudos to you. It's probably just me.
Could do that, yeah. Or it's a mambo, the West Side Story, could work.
That's
never know.
Too.
But so yes, the idea here is that Leon Rose doesn't want to give up later picks. Danny Ainge wants it. Just determining which picks, protections, all that stuff. So I want to lead into the visual aid here, which is the Knicks pick situation. And so the Knicks have their pick every single year for the next 7 years.
So beautiful.
They also have the Mavs 2023 first, which is top 10 protected. The Wizards 2023 first, which is top 14 protected. And the Pistons 2023 first, which is top 18 protected. And additionally, they have the Bucks pick, which is protected from 5 to 30. If it's 1 to 4, it goes to the Pelicans and it does not convey in a future year. So,
but if it's 5 to 30, it does convey.
The Knicks. Yeah. Yes. So I wanted to look at some scenarios and how that impacts the Knicks moving forward. So for starters, right? Let's just trade one. Let's say the Knicks trade all of their 2023 firsts. They trade their 2024 first. They trade their 2025 first and their 2026 first. That can't happen. The Stepien Rule says, nope, you can't trade. You can't have 2 years in the future, back to back, where you have the chance at 0 first-round picks. And that's exactly what happens here. If the Knicks trade all the 2023 firsts and the 2024 first, they can't do that. Even if there's a chance that the Wizards pick conveys in, say, 2024. Doesn't happen. But if you look at this other example, right, where imagine it's all the 2023 first the Knicks own, except for their own, but they trade the 2024 first, the 2025 first, and the 2026 first. They still can't do that. Why? Well, the 2023 first is fine, and you can trade the 2024 first, but you can't trade the 2025 first. And the reason for that is because of that Bucks pick. There is a chance that it does not convey because it's protected. So if for whatever reason, even if we know that the Bucks are not going to finish with a top 4 pick in the 2025 draft, as long as they have a healthy Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton. Well, actually, I could just stop. A healthy Giannis Antetokounmpo.
That's
the rest doesn't matter. Then, that's a problem. So the Knicks would have to find a way around this, and they can't just say, well, the Bucks will be fine. Don't worry about it. Because in the NBA's eyes, it's no. There's a chance that doesn't work, which then leads you to being in Stepien violation. You can't do that. So that, and just work.
To be very clear for anybody who's a little confused, if the Bucks pick theoretically was unprotected, the Knicks could trade away their 2024, 2025, and 2026 picks because they own that Bucks pick, but then they would thereby not be allowed to trade away that Bucks pick at a later point in a later trade.
You mean like this?
Oh, look at that.
Trade 3, baby. Look at this. So this would be the same thing, except the Knicks are trading the Bucks pick instead of their own pick. And if you're watching and you've seen a check mark on top of any of the logos, that is the soonest the Knicks could trade the next pick after the next X. So for example, here, right? Like there's an X over 2026. The Knicks can't trade their 2027 first. The next first they would be allowed to trade is the 2028 first. And they wouldn't be able to do that. Well, they could do it really anytime, but they can't trade the 2027 first until after the 2026 first conveys. So the same thing applies to the other examples, even though those don't work. But just that mindset of, okay, cool, we've passed this. It's like this year, right? You could trade all the 2023 first the Knicks have, and it wouldn't matter, and keep the 2024 first, and that's fine. Even though the Knicks traded the 2022 first, you might be thinking, well, they traded last year's pick. They traded all the picks this year. How can they do that? It's future consecutive firsts. Once it's in the past, it's irrelevant. It's out of the picture.
I just want to jump in real quick. If I had to wager a guess, I bet this is maybe not the Knicks' first offer when they were negotiating with the Jazz, but I bet if the Knicks had their druthers, this is what they would love to do. Send out all 4 protected picks and then send out their 2024 and their 2026. And then have, as you just mentioned, their 2028 left to trade should they want it.
Yeah, this is, I think there are a handful of picks or a handful of different options the Knicks would prefer from a pick standpoint. And I agree, this is definitely one of them. So just as an example, though, as I mentioned, the Wizards pick not probably, but it may not convey this year. So it could shift to 2024 when the picks decrease in protection. So for the Wizards, it's basically top 14 protected this year, top 12 the next year, then top 10, and then top 8. And then after that, it's they keep their own pick. It converts into seconds. And with the Pistons, it's top 18 this year. It's top 18 the year after that in terms of protections. And then it goes to top 13 protected, top 11 protected, and then top 9 protected. After that, it's similar in second round pick. So there's a chance that all these picks don't convey. In fact, I think it's probably a 99.9% chance that all three of these picks do not convey in the year 2023. I think would you say that's a fair assumption?
If all of these picks convey next year, I will drink a glass of moonshine on the pod.
There we go. All right. Something to maybe look forward to. So now I'm hoping for it.
Write it down, Angel.
So here's trade 4. This works. This is probably what the Knicks prefer the most, which is trading essentially all 4 of the picks that could be in 2023 and both the picks that would be in 2025. So even here, as I've mapped it out by shifting over the Wizards pick to 2024, Pistons pick to 2025 for when they might likely convey. Even still, the beauty of this is that if you're the Knicks, you get it all out of the way early. You trade 2 unprotected first, you trade 4 protected first. And then as soon as the 2025 free agency ends, or excuse me, as soon as 2025 draft finishes, you could actually trade that 2026 pick. But as of this moment, if they did this deal, the soonest they'd be able to trade is the 2027 first round pick. I don't think this is something Utah wants. I think Utah wants something that is more spaced out. They don't want 5 first round picks in 2023 because that's what they would have at minimum. Like it could even be 6 if the Wizards pick conveys. That's just too many picks to have in 2023. I don't think that they'd be happy at 2024 having a double pick draft there, but I don't think they'd be happy in 2025 because they're in a similar position. So this would be great if the Knicks had their way with it. I don't think they do. I don't think this is going to be what it winds up being.
Not even close. If they get a trade done with this pick situation, and I know I'm going to upset a lot of people when I say this, but I'll just say it very briefly. And even if they sent out 2 of the 3 young players and we're going to get to them in a sec, Obi quickly and Grimes, I think that would, for me at least, be marked down as a win if they did those 2 players and the 4 protecteds, 2023 their own pick and 2025 their own pick. For me personally, you listening may disagree. I think the Knicks would do this in a heartbeat. I don't think the Jazz are taking that offer.
No. Trade 5. This would be the Knicks trading the Mavs pick, the Wizards pick, the Pistons pick, their own pick in 2024, their own pick in 2025, their own pick in 2026. It's a little different than the one that we had talked about earlier with the Bucks pick conveying, but it's the same thing. If that Bucks pick becomes unprotected, then sure, the Knicks can trade 2024, 2025, and 2026. But the way that they would have to do that is calling up the Pelicans, who own the rights to 1 through 4, and say, hey, New Orleans, what can we give you to unlock the pick so that we get it completely unprotected? That's the only way the Knicks will be able to pull it off in this scenario right now.
We'll give you 1 Julius Randle.
Sure.
Done deal.
Great. Love it. That works. The 6th one. If you are the Knicks, and this is probably what Danny Ainge prefers the absolute most, is the Mavs pick, the Wizards pick, the Pistons pick, and then Knicks picks in 2024, 2026, and 2028. That's right.
This is the sweet spot.
This is the sweet spot for him. And this is where the Knicks cannot simply go. They cannot do this. This would be a disaster. I should also
they can. They're allowed to do it.
They're physically allowed to do it. But if they do it, I will march over to Leon Rose's office and the mob behind me will break down the door and we'll ask him what's up, because it's pretty messed up that he would do that. But he's not going to do that. I also should have mentioned probably at the top, there are a lot of pick swaps that are likely involved here, not just in this one, but in all these trades. I didn't want to get into the minutia of that. but just assume there will be at least a couple pick swaps. And that's fine because it's really more about, hey, you never know sort of thing with the Knicks. I don't expect the tanking Jazz to have a better record than the Knicks who would be trying to win with Donovan Mitchell and RJ Barrett. So, it's more just kind of not even saving face, just like, look what we got. Look what we extracted from this team. It's as much leverage as you can get.
I agree with that, although something that I don't think has been discussed enough is how much a pick swap in 2027 or especially 2029 could be worth to Utah. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I know we're getting there. But as these teams continue to try to negotiate potentially over a young player going or not going back in this deal, I wonder how much Ainge would value a potentially unprotected pick swap in, again, the last year the Knicks could give such a thing, which would be 2029. I don't know. Those it's funny. Those swaps get like thrown around as like an afterthought sometimes in all of these trades. I'm not saying just this one as we talk about it. They just swap. I mean, look, swaps have come back to bite teams in the ass before in over the last 10 years. They can be a very big deal.
Sure, but if that's the case, then that would require less from the Knicks being sent out, because if they're sticking there, okay, if we're willing to give you unprotected swaps here late, like 7 years from now, then we're going to expect you to relent on some other thing.
And that's where I wonder if this is heading. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep going. So this is actually part two of this trade. So if this were 2025, right? And that trade that we just discussed, essentially, all the 2023 picks except for the one the Knicks own, 2024 going out to 2026 going out, 2028 going out. If we're in 2025, right after the draft, let's say free agency 2025, the Knicks can't send the 2026, 2027, 2028, or 2029 firsts out. It would have to be starting with the 2030 first. That is 2030, the first round pick in 2030, not the 2030 first pick. So that is an issue. That's something that the Knicks would have to deal with, because basically if we're in 2025, the Knicks have 2 first round picks that they're available to trade out. That's it. That's a problem. And again, it's 2022. We are now talking. This is the type of that's why I'm happy we did this, because this isn't just about I don't want to give Quentin Grimes away. I don't want to give Obi Toppin away. No, this is about planning for how you get from point A, or theoretically acquiring Donovan Mitchell, to point B, where you're a legitimate contender. And yes, you need to project out to, okay, it's 3 years from now. And at that point, 3 years from now, you could trade away 2 firsts and 2 swaps. Is that the kind of runway that they need? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. And, I understand there are people who are like, it's cool, trade all the picks for Donovan Mitchell. I don't care. And whenever I think of it, it reminds me of like the people who are like, yeah, let me buy a home I can't afford. And then it's the Great Recession. It's like, crap, I can't afford this anymore. What do I do with my mortgage? Like, that is essentially, obviously it's less about personal finance and your credit score, but it'll hurt the Knicks, and we all love the Knicks, so we don't want to do that. But there's a part 3 to this trade, actually, which is that after the 2028 draft, then the Knicks would have completely unshackled their picks. They don't have to wait until 2030. They can trade the 2029 first. But here's the problem, John. We're not talking about, hey, we have to wait until 2028 in order for this to all unlock itself. Jeremy, and there are no restrictions. I know. How old are you going to be in 2028?
Jeremy, there is a year on this page that I'm looking at in which I will be 52 fucking years old.
Well, I'll be 40. So yeah, I get it.
Fuck everybody.
Yeah.
All of you. Just fuck off. Let's keep going with the presentation.
All right. Then we go to 20. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to go after that. I'm not going to make you feel any.
If there's a 2040 slide on here, I swear to Christ.
Well, John, there's going to be a 2073 first. I'm sure that whatever player will be born in like 40 years will totally be worth that play. That pick, whatever it is.
Bronny Jr. I don't even know.
Yeah, Bronny the 4th. I don't know. Could be.
That's the one.
Yeah. So here's the 7th trade. And I promise it's this one and then one more. So this is an interesting scenario that actually could work. let's say the Knicks trade the Mavs pick, the Wizards pick, the Pistons pick.
Okay.
They keep their 2023 first, their own. They trade their own 2024 first, right? And they trade their 2026 first. We've talked about a similar situation. But here's the thing. The Bucks pick is in 2025. So what happens if it's now, but it's probably later? If you're the Knicks and you can find a way to trade that Bucks first for an unprotected first in 2026, because suddenly you've sidestepped the Stepien Rule. You don't have to worry about waiting until 2028. And here it is, right? Let's say in this Jazz trade, the Knicks have traded the 2026 first, and then they found a way to trade the Bucks first in 2025 and move it for another first round pick that's unprotected in 2026. That would replace the outgoing first the Knicks have given the Jazz, which would mean that that's the first pick that they could trade. This isn't easy, right? If it were easy, the Knicks would have done it.
Who's doing this trade?
That's the thing. It's basically you're the Knicks. You have to find a way to say like, hey, team that is, I don't know, projected to pick 30th or something next year. What if we trade you this Bucks first and a couple seconds, and then you give us that first, right? Like the whole point here is it's not to get better value on the 2026 first. It's, hey, we can now trade all of our first round picks moving forward. And that's kind of how you get out of it, right? It's a get out of jail free card, so to speak. And I think I don't know. I'm not saying this would happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's a way of how you can do this trade and still find a way to enter a free agency in a few years. It's a sign and trade, or it's just an actual trade and have no restrictions whatsoever on your picks. That's how you get it done.
Yes. There is one other way, and I hope I'm not stepping on a future slide here, but if we're talking about the trade that you've been referencing the most, which is 24 and 26, right? With some swaps maybe also there. That allows the Knicks to trade a first in 2028, which means after next year's draft, right, they will be able to trade 28 and 30. You can, let's just say we're on draft night next year, right? They could agree to trade a pick that they make in next year's draft, right? The 2023 draft that they will make for themselves because they're not allowed to make it for everybody else. And then trade that pick plus 28 and 30. That's one other way you could send 3 firsts out where you're bending the rules, but you're not breaking the rules.
Agreed. But you'd have to find a team that's willing to do that. You have to find the right trade. It's
tough. It's hard.
It is. It's challenged. Yeah. Right. And then basically the last trade is the same thing that I just talked about, but it's the Pistons pick. So let's say the Pistons pick does not get traded and it still hasn't conveyed in 2025. And the Knicks call the Pistons up and they say, hey, let's talk about amending the protections, right? Whereas before it was top 18 protected for 2 years in a row, and then it's top 13 protected in 2025. The Knicks say, you know what? What if you keep this pick no matter what this year? But then the following year, it's completely unprotected. And then you find yourself in the same situation as you would with that Bucks pick. So it's, one of the two that's likely to convey later. That's kind of like how you kick the can down the road and unlock everything else. But I just wanted us to visualize this for people who might think like, all these picks going out, I can't keep track of them. I don't know what they look like. I'm a visual learner. So this is what it would look like.
I think the other thing that's helpful about this is acknowledging, and somebody brought this up on Twitter to me, or maybe it was in a newsletter comment. I honestly forget. Apologies if it was you listening and I'm not properly acknowledging you. Promise it's not intentional. The fact that the Jazz would seem, on paper at least, to rather have picks in 24, 26, and I know we don't want to give it, but 28. It creates an interesting scenario because if the Knicks were pushed to a point where they felt to get Donovan Mitchell, they had to give up 3 unprotected first round picks. Well, they may not want those in 23, 25, and 27, and they may prefer those. Obviously, Danny Ainge prefers a lot of things that may not matter, but just to hear me out, if they prefer it in 24, 26, 28, then all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're the Knicks and you can now not trade 2 unprotected first round picks until 30, 32. What's 7 years before 32? 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that may be an issue. So this is, you're presenting a lot of pluses, but I could also see that being a bit of a minus too.
Potentially. But still, I think you have to hold firm at a certain point. You can't let Danny Ainge derail the second part of what is a 2-part plan.
For sure.
Number one, get Donovan Mitchell in the building. Number two, get the guy who is better than Donovan Mitchell into the building. That's the major thing. But you also don't have to do it next season. You don't have to do it next summer in terms of finding that guy. If he shows up and you're able to do it, that's great. But you're probably going to have to wait a couple more years, which that's okay. You've got Donovan Mitchell. It's a good start.
When Donovan Mitchell will be 27 years old.
It's pretty good.
Love it.
So let's talk about Russell Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell.
Match made in heaven.
There was a conversation about, what if the Knicks got Donovan Mitchell and they got Russell Westbrook, right? Or, Russell Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell and one then the other, however it might work. And I feel as though the way it was reported, it's almost like there was uncertainty as to what this order might be. Right? Like what the order of operations would be. And that like Jake Fisher echoed Mark Stein's sentiments or reporting of Russell Westbrook could come to New York and they would buy him out and Donovan Mitchell would still be on the table. But then you see trades that are maybe going one way, but the configuration for the other one isn't working out. So I wanted to tackle that. But before we do that, I just want to be very clear up front. I'm not talking about
Ben Kingsley.
That is not Ben Kingsley. That is Sir Patrick Stewart.
I was close
with the count. You were close. You were close. Another knighted man. But yeah, I don't want to talk about picks for what we're about to discuss, really, just because the math is really what we're getting towards. Talking about picks, it kind of opens Pandora's box up a bit. It's just a separate conversation. We can have that separate conversation, but in terms of what I have put on this presentation, picks really doesn't make a presence here. Just want to get the framework for deals.
It's a great slide. Yeah. Yes. I'm just admiring the Sesame Street picture.
It's great. I love Sesame Street. It's perfect.
What's that, fella?
So here's where the Knicks are currently at right now. This is basically their 2022, 2023 season, and then some projections for 2023, 2024. And all you really need to know is that the Knicks are over the salary cap. But there are players who cannot be traded. And we will get into who those are right now. But if you also look moving forward, I mean, where the Knicks are based on, they could have a lot of not financial trouble, but the bills are going to add up, and we'll get into that too. But this is currently where they stand over the salary cap this year, over the salary cap next year. Totally fine. So I want to talk about the first deal. This is the Knicks getting Russell Westbrook and the Lakers getting, just for example, Julius Randle and Evan Fournier. I didn't even bother putting him in as a current player. I just sent him straight to dead money.
How dare you?
He would probably be waived. And
why do you hate Russell Westbrook?
I mean, I don't. No one does. Well, some people do, but he just doesn't have a role here. And I hope he spreads his wings and finds what he's looking for elsewhere.
How dare you talk about my least favorite NBA player that way? Please continue.
There you go. So, this is how it would work. This is what it would look like. Again, the Knicks would be well over the salary cap anyway, because they'd be taking on more money. They'd be fine in terms of what they're looking for. This really wouldn't open up a lot of cap space. Not unless Cam Reddish is also traded in some other fashion, as we've talked about before with Randle and Reddish and how their salaries kind of are connected and also go in opposite directions. That basically what I'm saying. If you haven't heard this podcast before when I've talked about it, if you trade Randle, having Reddish's cap hold doesn't get you a whole lot. If you trade Reddish, having Randle's salary doesn't get you a whole lot. You either want both or you kind of want neither. So this is going one-on-one. If it were Reddish still on the books, the Knicks would have, a little under $13 million, which is not a lot to spend in the next offseason. In fact, it's just a little bit less than the MLE, which the Knicks would be better off having as an over the cap team.
We should also point out here that you have a column where it shows the cap space that would be had if neither Randle or Fournier, because they're both going down the trade, or Reddish's cap hold were on the books. And that's not max cap space in 23-24.
It's not. It's just short of it. And now, $30.4 million is a nice chunk of change. It's just a matter of who is there to spend on. Who do you want to add to the team?
Next summer, we're talking
next
specifically.
Summer, right.
Yeah.
Like what free agent would there be? And you're not going to just trade for someone and absorb them into your cap space and they're being a good player. So that's why I still recommend the Knicks stay over the cap moving forward. But this is essentially how they would do it. Now the question becomes, well, what about Donovan Mitchell? Well, we run into a bit of a problem. So here's the thing. The Knicks can't trade Jalen Brunson. They can't trade Mitchell Robinson. They've traded Julius Randle and Evan Fournier. So the salaries they can trade that are over $5 million, Derrick Rose, RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish, Obi Toppin. So in order for the math to work, it's $24.2 million if Donovan Mitchell waives his trade kicker. The Knicks would have to send Rose and Barrett, Rose, Reddish, and Toppin, or Barrett, Reddish, Toppin, and Grimes. The Knicks are not going to do any of these.
Nope.
Not a single one is on the table. So it doesn't work. Can't do it. The next one, right? Let's do it in reverse. Let's see if the Knicks were to get Donovan Mitchell and then try to get someone like Russell Westbrook after that. So I have us basically sending out Fournier, Rose, and Grimes for Donovan Mitchell. And obviously picks would be attached to these. You can quantify them how you want. In my mind, it's probably closer to 4, maybe 5. 5 is probably the place where you say, got it, 3 protected, 2 unprotected, Grimes, Rose, Fournier, but that's it. Don't want to get more into picks than I already have. I promised myself I wouldn't. So in terms of getting Donovan Mitchell on board, him waiving his trade kicker, it's fine. It works out nicely. You got some salary still to trade. The following year, you're still probably very deep into the luxury tax, which is not the worst thing, but probably not where the Knicks want to be. And they really don't have any spending power outside of that. But if they want to get Russell Westbrook, then they have to do one of the following.
To be clear, for anybody who maybe spaced out for the earlier slide, we're not talking about getting Russell Westbrook to play for the New York Knicks. We are talking about getting Russell Westbrook to promptly waive him / buy him out, opening up future cap space. I just want to make that clear.
So as you can see here, well, you're not going to trade Donovan Mitchell, and you can't. Brunson can't be traded. Mitchell Robinson can't be traded. Isaiah Hartenstein can't be traded. So essentially, and I guess you meant to have Fournier's salary in here too. It's not showing, but it'd have to be Fournier. Or no, we just traded him.
Yeah, we just traded him.
So this is a slide I should have edited. That's on me. Unless I could take 2 seconds to edit that, if that's something that Mr. Producer would want. As I've already said.
Andrew?
I mean, I've already interrupted the flow.
We're already here. You're
Give
good.
Me 2 seconds. What?
No, keep going. Keep going.
All right, I'll keep going. Sure. So let's pretend it's not Fournier. Instead, it's Randle, right? So it'd have to be Randle and Barrett, or Randle, Toppin quickly, or Randle, Toppin, and McBride, which just none of those is going to fly. You're not going to trade Barrett to get Russell Westbrook's money to ease the way. That's not going to happen. You're not going to trade, again, apologies if it says Fournier, it's Randle. You're not going to trade Randle and Toppin together. That makes zero sense whatsoever. And you don't want to trade quickly to get the math done. You're not going to do, again, Randle and Toppin, even McBride. It makes no sense to do it. So if the Knicks basically did Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gay for Fournier, Rose, and Grimes, they could do that. It's similar to what we had just talked about. But
I feel like this trade, by the way, we should just acknowledge, has been like floating around the internet as the players most likely to be involved in this trade should it take place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. Or Rudy Gay isn't traded. I mean, again, if you're the Knicks and you're taking on Rudy Gay's salary, you don't want to send as much back because you're paying for him to sit on the bench for $6 million this year and for a player option that he will for sure take because he's in his mid-30s. And why wouldn't he?
Oh my God, he's a player option for next year?
Yes.
For 2023-24?
Mm-hmm. The Jazz, this is the issue of being a small market team. They went to Derek Favors and said, we'll give you a player option in year 3.
Yep.
They went to Rudy Gay and they said, we'll give you a player option for year 3. And both of those signings have not worked out well.
And if you're listening, you're like, wait a minute, Rudy Gay, I thought he was a pretty good player. Rudy Gay, the Rudy Gay experiment did not work in Utah last year.
It's not good. No. So this is where we're at. And then we're back where we started, essentially. It's the same slide, but guess what? You can't trade Rudy Gay in aggregate. You can't aggregate his salary in any of these deals. for Russell Westbrook to then promptly waive him. So it's like, again, are you trading Randall, Barrett, and Reddish? No. Randall, Barrett, and Toppin? No. And you're not trading, God, I said Reddish twice. You're not trading Reddish once, let alone twice.
So basically what you're saying here is there is no way, no feasible way that makes sense for the Knicks to execute two separate trades, one for Donovan Mitchell and one for Russell Westbrook. Is that fair to say?
Sort of. So the math works, but the deals don't make any sense.
The deals don't make sense. That's what I'm getting at.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the potential solution, which is a 3-team deal, which actually has much better math involved. So let's say the Knicks get Russell Westbrook, right? And Donovan Mitchell. And the Jazz get Derrick Rose and Kendrick Nunn, and the Lakers get Julius Randle, Evan Fournier, and Cam Reddish. That works. It works across the board. The Knicks take on $15.1 million. The Jazz actually lose $10.5 million. They shave it off of their payroll. And the Lakers shave off $4.5 million. Why is that important? Well, for the Knicks, as you can see, again, it's not about like, hey, the issues with the Knicks paying the luxury tax, that it does mean that the price of getting Russell Westbrook to just waive him, and maybe if you're lucky, buy him out, but probably not, because I don't know why he would want to do it. It's his money. He probably wants to keep it. You're essentially committing yourself to getting in the luxury tax this year if you're the Knicks. And that just may not be something they want to do. But if we look at the kind of brass tacks, quote unquote, why this works. For the Lakers and Jazz, they save the money, as I mentioned. The Lakers get rid of Russell Westbrook. The Knicks acquire Donovan Mitchell. And in this case, John, you tweeted this out. And for those who don't know, and that would be everyone, John had messaged me and Andrew on Friday saying he had a theory about, well, what if the Lakers took the 2027 first and sent that to Utah, and it involved the Knicks not having to send their 2027 first and all that. And I'm like, yes. Yep. You couldn't have waited like 2 days for me to also say this too. But no. This is. It
was in a text message. I didn't blow up anybody's spot.
No, you didn't blow up my spot at all. It was more like, damn, if only we had both had that on the same day to be presented. But no. Great minds think alike.
Let me have my small pittance.
Listen. You were first to report it, so that's you.
First to report,
first on the scene, baby. That's what it was.
Yeah, like I'm trying to one up Benji here with the reporting.
Exactly, we all have to. How do you get that kind of scoop otherwise? So, and the Jazz get to lose a lot of games, so that's why this works. But why it might not work? The Knicks, again, they're in the tax. The Lakers, they might not want to give up that 2027 first. There's also not a lot of expendable salary that the Knicks have. If we go back we don't have to go back. You can see it in another one. But essentially, there's no money they really have to help them trade for another player without giving up a core piece. And I'm not saying they can't do that or they wouldn't be able, that they'd be able to hang on to everyone. They wouldn't. But you at least want some sort of expendable salary, and the Knicks wouldn't really have that here. They'd also have no wing depth because they were just trading Evan Fournier and Cam Reddish. And Quentin Grimes is also out, even if he's more of a guard. There's some length there. There's some defensive versatility at very least. None of that's there. You're banking on 87-year-old Rudy Gay to kind of hold things together in the second unit.
Hold on, you don't think Carmelo Anthony could play the? Why do you hate Carmelo Anthony?
See, I do have in mind at the 4, but I don't think that would work exactly if Randall and Obi are here. But you never know. That's Eric Pachel's music. And then lastly, the Jazz, they probably need more assets from the Knicks, and the Knicks are probably thinking, we're taking on Russell Westbrook's money. The Lakers are barely willing to give up one first-round pick, and you're trying to hemorrhage us for more assets. It just doesn't really work. So it's a deal that could work, but I don't think it makes the most sense for these parties involved.
Might not.
So then we go on to another one, right? And this is the Knicks get Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gay, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Jazz get Russell Westbrook, Quentin Grimes. The Lakers get Julius Randle, Derrick Rose, Cam Reddish. Again, the assumption here is that Utah is getting picks. The Knicks save money here. They save almost $5 million. The Jazz add $7.7 million to their bill, and the Lakers they cut $2.8 million from them. or from their payroll, which is good for them because they're in the luxury tax and they don't spend a ton of money. They spend a little bit, but they're a little bit more frugal than some other organizations.
And so what you've done here is you have kept Evan Fournier on the Knicks, which I think if there were, I don't know, Vegas has odds on this somewhere, but like if there were odds up on like the most likely player to go out in a Donovan Mitchell trade right now, I am fairly certain the odds on favorite would be Evan Fournier. So in this world, Evan Fournier is actually staying on the Knicks, ostensibly to be the backup shooting guard.
Exactly. Taking Quentin Grimes' spot. So why this works? Again, Jazz and the Knicks. Well, actually, this would be the Lakers and the Knicks save money. Man, proofreading, folks. That's what goes into it. The Lakers get rid of Westbrook.
Shame.
I know. The Knicks acquire Donovan Mitchell. The Jazz get that first round pick from the Lakers in 2027. And the Jazz get to lose a lot of games, as we had said. But it's actually the Jazz do add more money. They add a lot more. They don't really want to do that. The Lakers probably don't want to give up that 2027 first round pick. And the Lakers are probably not trading enough. I mean, if they're getting rid of Westbrook, getting Randall and Reddish, that's not enough.
Wait, they're getting Rose though too,
and Rose, right? So it's just not. The Knicks and the Jazz will be like, hey, or the Jazz would say we need more, and the Lakers like, we're not giving it, and so they turn to the Knicks and say we need more, and it's like, we're not paying for the Lakers to take all of this off of our hands so we can work it out. Like that's not going to happen. So I don't think this is going to work out either.
I agree. I don't see this happening, but just so I know, the league year resetting, whatever it was a month ago or a little less than a month ago, the Knicks can they get traded out up to $5 million, right? Or send out up to $5 million?
Well, so the problem is that they sent money to the Pistons.
Oh, that's right. And that was in the new league year.
Finalized in the new league year. So the Knicks can't really,
Bad job by me. Okay.
No, all good. So then there's another one, right? Well, what if the Knicks got Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gay, Kendrick Nunn, Nickeil Alexander-Walker?
It's a lot of poo-poo platter right there.
It is. Jazz get Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook, who they buy out, Quentin Grimes and picks. Lakers get Randall, Conley, and Reddish. This is the most even money trade I feel like I could find that is closer. So the Knicks basically add $283,000 to their bill. The Jazz cut $364,000 to their bill. And the Lakers only add $80,000 to their bill.
Lakers got to be sending out a pick here, right?
100%. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, they're sending out the 2027 first. But again, if you're the Knicks, you're saying, like, we're not giving you another first that you'd require because the Lakers don't want to trade their 2029 first. You'd also hope that if the Lakers are acquiring this package, that they feel more comfortable as if they're, quote unquote contender, that LeBron James then signs his extension because that is the ultimate leverage play that he has right now. So financially, this is great. It's just a matter of if the Lakers can give the 2027 and 2029 first round picks, and that might not be something they want to do.
I don't think they're doing that. We don't have to have this discussion, and especially since I did not watch enough of him last year to really have a coherent opinion on this. But it would seem to me that Mike Conley's value around the league right now is up in the air a bit because of the nature of the fact that is going to make 40. We talked about this last week, I know briefly, but he's probably going to get all 2 years of this contract because whatever it is, 14 of the 22 in 2 years is guaranteed. That's I don't know. It's honestly Mike Conley's contract's a little bit like Julius Randle's. It's like there's a player there that could still do stuff, and the Lakers may look at Conley like they look at Randall, like, hey, yeah, let's bring those guys on. At the same time, are they value contracts? I don't know about that.
I mean, Randall at least is in the prime of his career.
He is.
Conley is 34.
Is not
35, getting there. So
it's very old, yeah.
But just quickly to wrap this one off, money's even across the board, really. As even as you'll likely get. Lakers get rid of Westbrook. Knicks get Mitchell. The Jazz get the Lakers 2027 first. Several Knicks picks, both protected and unprotected. But why it may not work. The Lakers, again, hesitancy over the picks, 2027 and 2029. And something to add about Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Jazz did give up assets to get Alexander Walker. not a lot, right? I mean, they gave
that was in the
Joe Ingles
Ingles trade to Portland. Okay, yeah.
But they wound up in the process sending out 3 second-round picks. Now, do I think Danny Ainge would have a problem sending Alexander Walker out if it also meant getting a lot of firsts back? No, I'd say you did a pretty good job and you have the salary filler going out. It's a worthwhile deal. But I think
that was a weird
it was a weird trade
when it happened. Yeah.
Yes. So, but this is an option. I just, I'm a little skeptical that these happen for finding the right moves, which leads us to, well, what have we learned for this one? The math does work. We've seen it work. We've seen it in action. But it's hard to find a perfect deal. It always is, but especially in this case, based on reluctance maybe from the Lakers of giving up those first round picks. So what's another solution?
Oh my.
A 4-team deal. And now I'm going to be honest. I don't like 4-team deals because they seldom happen. And a lot of times when I see them from other people and when they're presented to me, it's like, again, they just don't really happen that often. So the reason why I'm even bringing this into the conversation is because of a noteworthy tweet from this past week. It's from Bob Kravitz, who writes for The Athletic, based out of Indiana. And he said, per source, the Lakers-Pacers trade involving Russell Westbrook, Miles Turner, Buddy Hield, and other assets is currently dead. That's not to say the Lakers can't come back and add a second first-round pick to the current package of picks. But for now, things are at a standstill. So the reason why I thought of this trade, and I'm not the first person to think of a 4-team deal involving these 4 teams. I want to be clear. But maybe I found some other machinations that might work. But the reason I thought, well, let's see if we can play around with it is because it seems like you have the Knicks and the Lakers in a similar spot and the Jazz and the Pacers in a similar spot. The Knicks and the Lakers want to win. They want to acquire better talent. The Jazz and the Pacers are very comfortable just taking on not great contracts, focusing on picks, developing internally. They're at different stages of their rebuilds, but nonetheless, that's what they want to do. And so it's the thought process of how can we find a happy medium, if at all, for these 4 teams. But I'll yield the floor to you before I move on to the next part.
I just want to say, do that. One, when I realized this was going to a place where you would be presenting a 4-team trade, my eyes lit up like I'm watching a Kevin Feige presentation on the next 8 years of Marvel. 2, typically speaking, because we get tagged in a lot of these things on Twitter, and when I open, if your trade, when I open the trade, like the picture, like there are so many things in it that I can't even decipher, like the face of the person in the trade machine. That's probably not a trade that's going to work. Just pro tip.
That, and also the inclusion of a bunch of second-round picks in a star trade. Listen, that is not a priority. You got to give the get, and giving up second-round picks, just don't feature it. It's irrelevant.
What is the record still? Or did the Dinwiddie? Because the record was the Dwight trade, right? For the most players involved in one trade, wasn't that 19?
19 players.
I think it was. I could be wrong. I just. Andrew's going to look it up, but I think because the Dinwiddie trade last summer was wasn't that technically a 5-teamer?
I think it was 4.
Oh, was it 4? Okay, whatever.
4. But we've seen monster trades. Like the Capella trade was a 4-team trade.
Oh, that's true. It's a good call.
Like they come out of nowhere sometimes, and it's once in a blue moon.
But you can do them as we've talked about in the past. It is easier to do these things during the summer because there are roster spots open, but it's late. It's also late in the summer, and a lot, players have been signed. So that
Capella trade was mid-season. That was at the deadline too, which actually makes it all the more impressive that they were able to find 3 other teams that were comfortable enough to do this and had the wants and needs that worked out that way.
Good job by them.
No, do we have Andrew clarifying it, or are we?
So are you saying players, not like players plus picks?
I think just players.
There's 12 players in the Dwight Howard to the Lakers trade. Okay. But there was 8 other picks.
Okay.
So 20 assets in all.
20
that's
and a partridge in a pear tree.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a stab at these and see if any of them go. This is the first option. There are actually only really 2 options here. I had more, and I just thought, I'm not loving these. I don't need to do them. So got rid of them. So this is the first one. This is essentially Rudy Gay and Donovan Mitchell going to the Knicks. It is Derrick Rose, Quentin Grimes, Talen Horton-Tucker going to the Jazz. It is Julius Randle, Miles Turner, Buddy Hield, and Cam Reddish going to the Lakers. And it's Russell Westbrook going to the Pacers. The Jazz would get a bunch of first-round picks, and the Pacers would need to get first-round picks. I do just want to say before we launch into the discussion of this, I think the Lakers are actually pretty smart to not take the Pacers bait of you need to cough up another first-round pick in order for us to trade you, Miles Turner, and Buddy Hield for us to take on Russell Westbrook. I think that based on Turner's health and Hield's talent, it's not worth 2 firsts, even if you have to give up Russell Westbrook's expiring deal.
I mean, I don't want to turn this into a Lakers podcast, but I think you give up 2 firsts if you think it's a trade that can win you a championship in the next several years. And I think you're right on that. I don't think a Turner and Hield, a trade that gets you Turner and Hield, puts you in a position to win a title in the next couple of years, or in the, let's call it the LeBron, whatever years LeBron has left. At the same time, you are getting 2 starters there. Probably, I would assume Hield would start for them in that scenario. But yeah, I'll co-sign that. Yeah, I think it's smart that they don't give up the second.
I should say I'm of the belief that I don't think there's anything the Lakers can realistically do that gets them back to legitimate contending status. And I understand that it's LeBron James. He's elite. You got Anthony Davis on the team. Like, a lot of things can click right. I totally hear that. And at the same time, if they found themselves bouncing back, yeah, okay, it's LeBron. It's silly me to count LeBron out. It's more just how they are constructed. It's tough. It's a really tough conference. They've got an uphill battle, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't try, because if you have prime LeBron, or at least LeBron, I mean, it's still LeBron James. If you have him on your team, it's better to go in and support him than it is to worry about, hey, what's our team going to look like in 2027 or 2029? And I agree, this isn't a Lakers podcast, but it plays prominently into this trade, which is why it's like it now suddenly does become a Lakers podcast, because it's indirectly a Lakers podcast.
Well,
so it's important
because look, it's one of the 3 hot button stories in the league right now. The Russell Westbrook thing, in addition to Donovan Mitchell and Kevin Durant, and the Westbrook thing is intimately involved with the Knicks' pursuit of Donovan Mitchell, because there's not a whole lot of other players. As obviously, if you haven't gotten this much by now, you should know that the reason the Knicks are being mentioned, we should have said this up front. The reason the Knicks are even being mentioned in the Russell Westbrook thing is because there's not a whole lot of teams that just have 40 plus or whereabouts of $40 million in salary that they are comfortable sending out the window. And the Knicks may qualify for that, label.
So for this deal, right? With Rudy Gay and Donovan Mitchell, we've covered that before. Derrick Rose, Quentin Grimes going to the Jazz, and Talen Horton-Tucker. Now, the Jazz may not love this because Horton-Tucker has a player option the following year, yet they project to have a lot of money coming off the books. Boyan Bogdanovic, they'll probably trade Derrick Rose for expiring salary. Quentin Grimes won't really cost them very much for the next 3 years. They can make other trades. They can find a way to hopefully get Mike Conley moved elsewhere and take back expiring salary. Maybe they can do the same for Jordan Clarkson. So there are ways they can get around it, and saving $9+ million off of their payroll, that works for them. For the Lakers, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. I think having Julius Randle off the bench, again, I know where we disagree a little bit is I see Julius as a much better player than a 6th man type, but here he's stuck behind Anthony Davis.
I think in the right scenario, he could be a really, really helpful starter. And this might be just such a scenario.
Yeah. Like if you're predicting that Anthony Davis misses time, you'd want someone to fill in his place.
And when has Anthony Davis ever missed time?
Right. So having Julius Randle be there is some support that they might need, paired with Miles Turner, who obviously they're both from Dallas and have that connection. They practiced a lot together. You get Buddy Hield, the spacing that the Lakers have wanted since when he was a King before he was traded in the Halliburton deal. And you get Cam Reddish, that's still a younger piece that they can extend. Problem is that, you're adding $11.5 million that also adds to their tax bill, which will increase. So, and on top of that, they'd have to trade the 2027 and 2029 first for this to work out. So the question then is, how do they do all this? Do they want to do all of that? And you look at the Pacers. The Pacers are adding almost $8 million to their books. And this is where the Lakers pick coming into play that you talked about, we were going to talk about, all that makes sense. So what happens if one of those Lakers firsts, let's say it's the 2027 first, goes to Utah? And then one of the Knicks first that would go to Utah actually goes to the Pacers. So like, what if the Pacers got the Detroit pick and a heavily protected 2029 Lakers first?
I like that.
That is like lottery protected, right? They get their second pick. There's a chance that the Lakers don't even have to send the 2029 first. Like that sort of thing. So this is how I feel like you get closer to satisfying the needs of all these teams. Knicks get their star, Jazz get their picks and can tank. Lakers get more firepower to help them with LeBron and Anthony Davis. And the Pacers take on expiring money and get 2 first-round picks. That's the type of move that satisfies and checks off all the boxes.
I hope I'm not blowing up the next slide, but couldn't you do none and couldn't you do none instead of Horton Tucker if the Pacers send out more salary, or does that not work on the Lakers?
Doesn't work for the Lakers side.
Doesn't work on the Lakers.
I think I tried that, and the reason don't have it is because it didn't work.
Got it.
But then and here's the second option, right? So it's similar to the first. Only Hield goes to New York.
Oh, no.
LA. Fournier goes to Utah. Rose goes to LA, and Reddish stays. So to recap, what it all looks like, right? And we'll talk it through. It's Rudy Gay, Buddy Hield, Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks. It's Evan Fournier, Quentin Grimes, Taylor Horton Tucker to the Jazz. Derrick Rose, Julius Randle, Miles Turner to the Lakers, and Russell Westbrook to the Pacers. The thought process here was, if you are the Jazz, you don't take on money. If you're the Lakers, you cut salary there. The Lakers also cut salary, and still, right? They're adding another point guard. They're adding depth behind Anthony Davis in Julius Randle. They're adding a center in Miles Turner. It's the same thing with the Pacers with the pick situation. With the Jazz, they take Evan Fournier instead of Derrick Rose. If I'm a Knicks fan, I like the first one better.
I was about to say, the first one
like
just makes more sense.
It does. The Jazz, I think, probably prefer the first one too. The Lakers, my guess is they prefer Cam and Buddy to Rose, and the Pacers are doing their own thing. It's the same thing for them.
And we should just say, for anybody who may have missed it, when it happened, the Lakers were the team at the trade deadline who were rumored to be interested in Cam Reddish. Cam Reddish, as you may or may not know, is a Clutch client. And it's an interesting situation because, we've talked a lot about Cam Reddish on this podcast and in live streams and things. And there's a lot of people out there who are very high on Cam Reddish because of his potential. And I agree with those people. The tough part is finding a situation where a team is going to allow him to, spread his wings, so to speak, to explore his game. And typically the teams that do that for a player of Cam's nature is a bad team. And yet you're not going to see a bad team in the league next year giving up a real thing, whatever that thing is, to take on Cam Reddish at this point, extension eligible, a year away from restricted free agency. The Lakers might be the one team where you could see them allowing him to see what he is as an NBA player, maybe under the guise of like, hey, LeBron, kind of takes him under his wings, that sort of deal. It's just something I wanted to throw in there because I do think the idea of Cam to LA makes sense on a few levels.
Yeah, it seemed like they weren't super far away from that happening at the deadline.
No, it doesn't.
I do think, though, that if you're the Jazz, same thing with Barrett and Tyler Hero and Cam, you don't necessarily want to pay Cam Reddish in the third year, entering the fourth year of his deal, and have to worry about that the next year. But I do think that there are some teams that might have that interest that are in a similar position and a lot can change for sure, but like Orlando, Houston, I'm not saying those are the teams that are going to do it, but teams
they got a lot of young players.
Right. Already. I agree with you. Yeah. But teams that are not going to be good, that have a lot of money to spend next year and very little talent to spend on, that's the only thing. That's where they could come into play. But
hell, I don't want to throw this into crazy town, but like the Pacers, I could even see taking a swing at Cam. I don't, I don't know how the money would have to work, but like, I think the point is this 4-team construction that you've stumbled upon. It's really not nuts at all.
I'd like to think it's not.
It's not.
Granted, and this will bring us to our last slide here. I think ultimately it's just going to work out as a 2-team deal. It's the simplest. It's the cleanest. So again, I talked about Evan Fournier, Derrick Rose, and Quentin Grimes. Now, I know Ian Begley talked about in his article the idea of, well, it doesn't really make sense to have Fournier and Rose together based on what the Jazz want to do. And I agree with that. But the money itself is a challenge otherwise. Because again, if the Jazz don't want Cam Reddish and they can't find a third team to work within the parameters of what they need, you kind of have to get to Fournier, Rose, and someone like Grimes, unless you add in Obi Toppin. But you wouldn't do Toppin and Grimes. If you're the Knicks, you'd probably do one or the other. My guess is the extra year of control for Quentin Grimes is more appealing than it would be for Obi Toppin. But if that's the case, this is that 3-team deal. This is essentially how the Knicks are set up. Again, they're deep into the luxury tax projected for not this season, but the following year. The one thing I didn't say that I want to say, I talked about the luxury tax on Twitter, and there were several people who basically said, like, the Knicks will pay the luxury tax. Stop worrying about it. It doesn't matter. And that wasn't what I was actually getting at. It had nothing to do with the Knicks are cheap. The Knicks don't want to do it. All that. It's if you can build a good team and spend less doing it, why wouldn't you? If you can find a way to essentially, I don't know, hypothetically replace Cam Reddish with a player who is drafted in next year's draft, assuming you still have a pick left. Like, if you're the Knicks, why would you spend all that extra money if you feel like the production is potentially similar in value? You probably wouldn't. It's why they could easily make a move at some point on the horizon. Drink to that, because we mentioned the idea of trading Cam Reddish. This would leave the Knicks with 4 empty roster spots. They'd probably fill it out with Eric Paschall, Ryan Arcidiacono, a Wayne Selden type who's not Wayne Selden, but is you're not doing the farewell tour. And that's what I was going to get to. You could still do the farewell tour. You could still do the farewell tour for Carmelo Anthony, have him sign for the room exception. It's just, the thing is, if you've got Julius Randle and Obi Toppin, you're going to have Melo on the bench consistently. Now, I know there are people who are listening to this and like, yeah, that's fine. Like, okay, you can have Melo on the farewell tour. You can pay the room exception. I don't really care, but I don't want him taking minutes away from Obi Toppin. And if Julius Randle's here, then he's not better than Julius Randle. I get that. And I don't even think I disagree with that philosophy. It's more the matter of, if Randle's still here and you have Obi Toppin, then yeah, you could have Carmelo Anthony be here. Just don't expect him to play a ton because he's not going to play the 3.
This was really good. I'm really happy we did this because, again, I don't like to repeat myself too much, but I will here briefly. That we get so caught up when we talk about trades in general, but specifically the conversation around this trade, because there has been so much conversation around this trade about specific, like, I don't want to give up this many picks, or I don't want to give up this young player. This is so complicated, this trade, because of all of the options that are on the table, and going through it like this, whether or not the Jazz and Knicks and potentially the Lakers and the Pacers end up going one of these roads is less interesting to me than the fact that, like, I would wager, and I bet you would wager too, that all of these teams have gone through all of these and in painstaking detail, all of these possible scenarios. And that is what you have to do in a trade like this, where there are so many godforsaken possibilities. I'll give you my 2 cents, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it after everything we've just talked about. One, I agree with you. A 3-team trade makes more sense than a 2-team trade. And yet consensus opinion from people who have been doing this for a very long time is that, like, if you can make it a 2-team trade and make it less complicated, that's what you do. And like if you could do it with two, do it with two. And I don't know if that's persuading me here, because it just, you have this situation where you have this $47 million albatross on a team that wants to get rid of the $47 million albatross and replace him with something that will, and especially in light of, the agent kerfuffle that happened with Russell Westbrook. I mean, how often does an agent fire a max player of 14 years? But that's what happened. Essentially a week and change ago. Like, man, with them, Russ and LeBron not talking to each other or not looking each other's way at Summer League. Like, this is a bad situation that needs to be resolved for any number of reasons. Like, it feels like there's something there where it would make a lot of sense. You do not, I think you agree with that.
I do. Listen, there's a reason why I feel like this is probably a 2-team deal. And yes, did I go through an entire presentation of 3-team deals and 4-team deals only to say that I don't feel confident that any of those happen?
Yeah. Why though? I mean, do you have a reason?
Well, for the same reason, probably, that there are more monogamous couples than there are polyamorous couples. Like, it's just easier to work with one person. I don't know. Like, it's just, there's so many different things. There are only 30 teams, and you have to find the right teams that match up. And there are a bunch of teams that are set for the summer. And then you have teams that maybe might want to get in on it, but it needs to be on their own terms. And they don't want to, give in any way, shape, or form. And that's like Indiana. They are comfortable going into the season with almost $30 million in cap space. But if they can use that cap space to then get them assets, then sure. But it needs to be on their terms. Otherwise, it's, well, we can take this into the season, and if something else arises, we can act as a third team to take on salary.
I guess I'm purely from the Lakers' perspective, and we don't have to talk about this for too long, but I do wonder, is it as simple as, and this is really what it would take, right? It would take them looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, we can't go into the season with Russell Westbrook on this roster. I have no idea if that's what they are saying to themselves right now. You don't have any idea. Nobody has any idea if that's what they're saying to themselves right now. If they are, and the options are either we John Wall him and tell him to go away for the foreseeable future, or until we, reach a buyout or whatever, or get something for him, then I think the equation is as simple as like, look, if we get something that we deem good enough for the 27 first round pick, we'll do it. If not, we won't. Is it that simple? I don't know. But if it is that simple, maybe that is the way they get into this trade, because it isn't something that complicates it too much. Again, we're just guessing here.
It goes back to LeBron though.
It does go back to LeBron. It always goes back to LeBron.
It always does. Yeah. Where imagine Jeannie Buss going to LeBron and saying, hey, we didn't trade Russell Westbrook. And LeBron
deal with
asking why. Why is it that when I joined this team, I left a team that went to the finals every year. I went to the finals for 8 consecutive seasons because of me. Why is it that now you're prioritizing someone who will be drafted in 2029 over the needs that I have? You're not going to have a player like me for a long time. You'd have to find them in the draft, and that's a crapshoot. You'd have to trade for them, and you don't have the picks. So you'd have to have someone like me who joined what was at the time your sorry ass organization, who was willing to take a sabbatical and come here and then try winning. And then you did what I needed you to do because you got Anthony Davis. And I love you for that. But now I need you to do more. That's what the conversation is. And he doesn't have to sign that extension. And he won't sign that extension until they keep their end of the bargain. And they have a very easy decision. They could either focus on the future, or they could focus on not having LeBron, or they could focus on having LeBron and maximizing the time they have left with him. And I think one of those options is great. And I think the other one is whatever. And the one that's great is the LeBron one.
No, I completely, you cannot let him walk. And for anybody who doesn't know, LeBron can extend, I think, what is it, August 6th, 7th, 8th, something like that. It's within a week or so into August. if like that date is coming, it's a big deal. That is the next big date circled on the NBA calendar. Does LeBron extend when he's extension eligible? And that is the the axe that he has to hold over, and not to get too gruesome, over Jeannie Buss's head here. The other thing I just wanted to pivot, and then we'll finish up. You had Quentin Grimes in, I think, pretty much all of these trades.
Yeah.
It feels like that's where this is going. I don't say upsetting, as unfortunate as that is, because I do think it's unfortunate, because I did just watch Quentin Grimes dominate Summer League like everybody else did, and he was amazing. And I stand by everything I said in those post games, which is that like they need Quentin Grimes. They not only need Quentin Grimes in the immediate future, but they really would do themselves a favor by keeping this guy on the roster long term, because man, there's some real upside there to be one of the elite 3-and-D and plus, and we're still figuring out what the plus is, but one of those sorts of players in the league, like the types of guys that make $20+ million. I think Grimes has that in him. And yet the way it's going, it doesn't feel like the deal's getting done if Grimes isn't in it.
A few things. First of all, it's still 3 years of team control on a rookie skill contract. That's incredible value. Even if you're trying to be a losing team, that's still good. And you know what? You can also always let him be a higher usage guy and flip him for, as part of a trade up, if it nets you a great player or another asset, whatever it might be. He's
trade him in 2 years. Let's start his rookie deal. Yeah,
that's the thing. So, but if you're the Knicks, and you have Jalen Brunson and you have Donovan Mitchell for, let's say, the foreseeable future. Again, anything can change, but you also have RJ Barrett there. What is the path for Quentin Grimes to even play enough for him to be that player describing? Because
can I throw in we'll finish what you're saying? I'm going to throw in one thing to add to that.
Again, the Knicks, they clearly love Emmanuel Quickly. And
that's what I was going to throw in.
To Rokas Jokubaitis. And they could easily next summer say, well, whatever happens with Deuce McBride, let's say he's a good player. Great. He could play here. Or he's a good player and they want to bring Jokubaitis over because they feel he's a better player. Awesome. You could wait on Jokubaitis, or you could bring him over now and trade Deuce McBride when he's technically expiring salary, because he'd be entering that third year. No. Or Deuce McBride is not necessarily a great player. And it's okay, well, this is an easy decision. We'll bring someone over who we have their rights, sign him to a portion of the mid-level exception, and it works out nicely. So, to me, he's not this obstacle, but it's Emmanuel Quickly's presence that makes Grimes expendable, in addition to Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson. And I think the big thing here is we're talking about, and this is actually what I find to be super impressive, and I don't think I've seen really anyone talking about it because it hasn't happened yet. So we haven't gotten to that point. But the Knicks went to the 2021 draft. They had the 19th pick in the 21st draft. They traded out of the 19th selection. They traded back from the 21st to the 25th, and they still acquired Quentin Grimes. So now we're talking about one of the major focal points of this trade being a player that they traded out on, traded 1,000%. Back for, and is now featured as he's not the 25th pick anymore, but that's the value the Knicks use to then say to the Jazz, here you go. We're going to add some picks and we're going to add someone like Evan Fournier, but you want Quentin Grimes because of what he's been able to show you. And we were able to get that value 6 picks away from him being a second rounder. I have to
jump in here because it's such a good point and nobody has made it, which is that we in New York, if this trade goes down and Quentin Grimes is in it, me included, will be like, my God, I can't believe we lost Quentin Grimes. How are we going to deal without Quentin Grimes? Around the league, and this is a big if the Knicks can get away with a pick package in this trade that is not hit you over the head bad, but is just like, okay, that's a lot. But the Knicks they survived this. They came out of this in one piece in terms of flexibility. And all it cost them was a guy that was the 25th pick in last year's draft. Look, it's the Knicks, so I say this with trepidation, but I think they will get some praise for it, for the ability to turn a 25th pick, or actually a 19th pick, and then 21 and then 25, like you just said, into the key young component of this trade.
I think it's sweet that you think anyone mainstream has the ability to think that critically and praise the Knicks for it at the same time. But we can do that here.
The people that
maybe Mr. Zach Lowe.
I was about to say, friend of the pod, Zach Lowe. Yeah.
He's the only one I could see maybe doing that. But other than that, it'll be more like, yeah, they got Donovan Mitchell. And that's how I feel. Yeah, it'll be, Quinn Grimes and those firsts. It's not easy. But then it's, Knicks got Donovan Mitchell. And as you've mentioned before, like, well, isn't this the point? You're trying to get stars. It's the price of doing business. I'd be able to sleep well at night. It just comes down to the amount of picks, and it comes down to when they are being processed, the years that go on.
Last thing I just want to say briefly, this is just my let's call it an informed guess. I wonder if the final major holdup here is Obi, and I think the Knicks want to hang on to Obi. I don't think the Knicks have any desire to give Obi Toppin up, and I think the Jazz are. I don't know if they're desperate for him, but I wonder if the Jazz are trying to push for Obi with the understanding that with Danny Ainge perhaps knowing Leon Rose is not going to give up Obi Toppin, and using that again, the trying to pry Obi away to force the Knicks' hand on something that the Jazz A, think they can get, and B, probably matters more to them in the big picture, whether that is a swap and, lessening protections, something along those lines. Because look, as many have said on Twitter, don't believe it until it comes from Woj, Shams. That said, the amount of smoke that's been out there about these two teams having tentatively agreed on something, I wonder if we aren't, pretty far down the road here. And this is the last sticking point in these negotiations. And I just, I don't know what that means, but that's kind of where I'm at right now.
If we're not far down the road, then I may just not watch basketball. Because I mean, like, what have they been talking about at this point? Like, what they had for lunch? I don't know. What I'll say is I feel like there's a distinct possibility that the Knicks have laid out a number of different packages to Utah.
I agree.
And Utah is then saying, hey, which one do we want? What's the one that works best for us? And then they are free to then say, hey, final call. Anyone, please, Bueller, anyone, for the love of God, help up the price. And they probably won't find it because the Knicks have drawn their line in the sand. And if you're Utah, you don't want to have this drag into the regular season, because we saw what that happened with Silas and the Houston Rockets and James Harden. And it just wasn't pretty. So I think there's enough leverage for both teams to want to get this done. And I think they've talked enough where they've ironed out a lot of the details. It's probably just, which young player they want. Maybe one has other picks that are associated versus the other. It's tough to know, but I feel like that's at least closer, or hopefully closer to where we're at in the process, and kind of go from there.
For those of you listening on the pod, you have no idea what just happened. But for those on YouTube, you saw a transition. We had some internet issues on John's side, and we lost him for the remainder of the pod. So, Jeremy, I'll join you to take us home. Any other final thoughts on what you discussed today?
Again, just want this to be over. And listen, I presented what I feel like is more like a consulting type approach, which is like, these are the options. And, the expression of how opinions are like buttholes. Everyone has them. Well,
everyone has one.
Folks,
wow.
Today,
that is a sentence Jeremy said.
You saw the butthole.
I
saw my butthole. I hope it was good.
What the? John missed that.
Yeah. It happened. It's his loss.
I think that's a perfect place to end. I've one just thing to add, and it's a very narcissistic and personal request on behalf of me and my beloved. I leave for vacation next Saturday. The plan was to turn my phone off and just kind of like, I have books I was going to read and catch up on. I was going to take the iPad to the beach and watch Better Call Saul finally, or catch up on Better Call Saul finally. Make this deal by Friday, Knicks and Jazz, or wait until the following Friday to do it. And then we'll be cool. I will be furious if this trade. I'm bringing my stuff as a breaking case of emergency, but please don't let there be an emergency while I'm on vacation. If you had a over under betting chip of like a date, or I guess the date, you know how they do it for pregnant women, like guess the date of when the trade would happen. What would your date be?
I think John and I talked about, like he said early August, like August 8th. I think. And I said like the 19th or something. I really hope that he's much closer to it and it's on the opposite side where it's this week. That'd be nice. Just do that. Have you enjoy your vacation. Lord knows you've earned it. So it would be nice for you to be able to get that. But also just, it'd be cool to put it behind us and we just can move on with this process. So I'm going to say July 27th. Let's aim for July 27th.
Wednesday. Awesome.
Yeah. Why not?
I'll be down. I'll go 19th of August. I think this thing might play out a bit. They'll just stare at like you said, they'll stare at each other across from the lunch table. And then eventually someone will like, fine, I'll go get the food, you know? So, Jeremy, as always, you are a master of this and the Cap or No Cap series. Thank you, John, as always, for spearheading this ship as long as you could. Thank you to our listeners. We appreciate all of you. To our patrons listening, thank you. First of all, Jesus, the support we're getting on Patreon over the last month. Thank you for signing up. And to those of you in the Monroe or Ewing tier, we'll be making this announcement on Patreon, but the town hall will be this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Zoom link will be sent out. If you'd like to join us, head on over to the Knicks Film School Patreon. The link is in our link tree in the Twitter accounts. It's in the KFS link tree, which is in our Twitter account bio. You can also just go to patreon.com/Knicks Film School and search there. You can join us for the Monroe or Ewing tier, and we'll be on Zoom all together, chatting it up on Thursday night. Last but not least, Jeremy, who gets traded first, Donovan Mitchell or Juan Soto?
Trade deadline for MLB is August 2nd?
Yes. Also, while I'm on vacation.
Fun. Yeah. I'm going to go with Donovan Mitchell. I think Juan Soto, the offers aren't going to be what the Nats want. The higher bidding war in the offseason. I think they'll take this into then. What's another 2 months, really, unless some team gets absolutely desperate. So I think Donovan Mitchell gets traded before the winter. So I'm going to go with Donovan Mitchell.
Okay.
What say you?
I also think Donovan Mitchell will have, with the caveat that I can say wouldn't be shocked, but if the Yankees were going, so the Dodgers have done this lately with like, we know Corey Seager's free agent. So we went out and traded for Trey Turner. We know that like this guy's a free agent. So we'll get like a younger replacement now that's got years of control. If the Yankees ever wanted to do that, and like we know Aaron Judge, who's on pace for 61 home runs, is going to be a free agent. And the easy sell to our fan base is for the last 3 months of Aaron. You put this in my head, Jeremy. Okay. The last 3 months of Aaron Judge, he's in the same outfield as Juan Soto, and we went for it for a championship. And even though Judge is going to walk, we're going to extend Juan Soto for the next 15 years. That's the sell if you wanted to do it. But we'll see what happens. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Speaking of the Yankees, they play my Metropolitans at their weakest moment this week. So I look forward to the back and forths on Twitter to an extent. Jeremy, I have zero confidence in those back and forths at the moment. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you dig the show, head on over to iTunes and drop a 5-star rating and a review. We'll be back with 2 episodes later this week from interviews from people in the industry. Until then, thank you for listening, and we'll speak with you soon. Peace.